Okay, so thanks everyone for joining today. I'm super excited. Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Cynthia. I'm on the learning team here at Terra.do. And I'm very excited to have all of you here today, but also to have François Burra here today, who's going to talk about the carbon footprint of digital products and also teaches a course with Terra on how to decarbonize those products. I think François introduces himself a little bit, but he's worthy of maybe two introductions. So I will start with a brief one, which is that François is a co-founder of, François is a sustainable digital and low carbon product consultant, mentor, and speaker with several years experience as a product lead and a UX designer, and 13 years of experience working with startups and agencies in Canada and the US. And he helps digital companies reduce their digital emissions by delivering trainings, measuring digital emissions, and creating low carbon experiences. And so there's probably no one better suited to give this presentation today. So without further ado, two housekeeping items. This will be recorded and sent to everyone who RSVPs. I always get that question multiple times. And if you have any questions, it would be helpful if you use the Q&A function. Sometimes it's hard to sort through the chat, but we'll figure it out at the end of the call either way, when we do the Q&A. So without further ado, I will pass it over to François.
Thank you, Cynthia, for the introduction. And hi, folks. Good to have you with us for this hour long. And hopefully you're going to learn a few things, and we're going to have a fun discussion at the end. I imagine you can all see my screen. So I'm just going to move right ahead and take us through the presentation. But I'm just not going to introduce myself much better than Cynthia did. So I'm just going to skip to that. But basically, I pivoted my whole career 3 years ago to really help my industry, the digital industry, to reduce their emissions given the context we're living in. And that's basically what I do on a daily basis. And today we're going to talk about the impact of the digital industry, or the ICT, information communication technology, on the environment and the biodiversity. And we're going to try to understand like where emissions come from and the role we can all play, but also things that we can do practically today or tomorrow to start, driving climate action towards further. So first thing, I'm going to start with a bit of bad news, which is fine. We're going to get through it, and it's going to be better news towards the end or the middle section. But we need to know where we start from. And in 2021, digital emissions were accounting for 3.8% of all emissions worldwide. So basically, it's digital emissions are huge, and as you can see, they're twice bigger than the amount of the aviation industry and about the same of the road freight. So we're not talking about the 0.1%. It's a pretty major industry worldwide, right? And unfortunately, it's going to get worse due to AI, crypto, blockchain, and just digital being very successful and useful for the society overall. Those emissions are going to keep growing until going to keep growing, but most likely we have some predictions saying that by 2040, we're going to reach 40%, 14% of all emissions worldwide that will be accounted for digital emissions. So again, it's pretty bad, and it's going to get worse. And it's one of the biggest industry who don't see their emissions declining, right? Like if you think about aviation, if you think about transportation, food and ag, it's all stabilizing or going down. I don't have like exact figures for that, but we can see the trend happening there. But when we talk about digital emission, it's kind of growing almost exponentially, which just makes us realize that we have all the responsibility and a role to play. And hence why we all gather today to start to see how we can take action. Cynthia, okay, you saw the Q&A comment. All right, moving on. Just so you understand like where those emissions come from, and like realize how impactful our industry is in the real world. Basically, you have about like most emissions come from the end user level. A big part of that is the manufacturing of our devices and electronic equipment. Right, you can see 60% of emissions come from end user, and like about 40% come from the device manufacturing and life cycle, let's say. And you can see also like data centers usually have like a bad reputation, being like the evil kind of a big thing in the elephant in the room. But as you can see, it's a bit more nuanced than that. It has definitely a big role to play, but it's only, at least back in 2021, was only accounting for 19% of all emissions. So you can see between like the network, the data centers and end users, there's an interesting split. But then after, if you look at the operation or the usage and the manufacturing production, there's also an interesting split. So it's a bit more a nuanced picture, and I hope that helps you understand that digital is physical, and we're talking about real materiality there. In terms of the ins and outs, we're going to go through that quickly, but like obviously to build our infrastructure, data centers, devices, submarine cables, and so on, we need some metals, we need some actual resources, and to power them, we need some electricity that comes from some green or renewable sources and some less, but also water. And the output is obviously greenhouse gases emissions and carbon emissions, and also electronic waste. So we're going to go through that. In 2019, the world was composed of 34 billion pieces of equipment, electronic equipment. So you can imagine like at least for the Western country, like we have a lot of pieces of equipment, from your coffee maker who has like a specific functions, to your tablet, your phone, to your computer, to your maybe electronic ring bell, or like you can imagine, like we all have a lot of equipment. So imagine the amount of resources and precious metals and materials that we all need to extract it to build them, right? So this is really very this is what makes a big part of our industry, and emissions come from there. You can see, for example, this gold and copper mine in Oyu Tolgoi in Mongolia. So that's one example, but basically we are like scrapping the earth, we're destroying an ecosystem, damaging the biodiversity just to be able to use our equipment. So obviously we can see the direct impact here, but also it's interesting to see, based on all the materials that we need, that not all material have the same importance or play the same role or are under the same stress. There is a risk in terms of availability of materials, right? So you can see this is an analysis for Europe, the European Union, but you can see like some material are more rare than others. There's also a geopolitical trade risk that are associated to it, where a country may have more leverage or can disrupt, a value chain because they own, a specific material that is critical in the building and manufacturing of our devices. And then that leads also to volatility of price. So when we kind of zoom out a bit, it starts to be a bit more complex than just, oh, I have this website and maybe how can I optimize my image or things like that. It's anyway, it's a big and it's a big topic, and it's intertwined in many aspects of our life, including geopolitical aspects. But then, like, to support our usage, obviously we need a lot of cables, submarine cables, terrestrial cables, but also satellites and so on. So again, we need to produce them, we need to launch them, we need to power them. So there's a huge infrastructure that support our usage. And here is a photo of a data center located in North America, actually in Montreal, where I'm calling from, just to see again the materiality of it. All right, moving on from the materiality to more the energy piece of it. And this is a bit of a contentious statement because it's not 100% true, but you can definitely imagine that given that most of our energy is powered by fossil fuel at the moment, internet can be considered as the latest fossil fuel powered machine that human has ever built. And just to be a bit more nuanced here, you can see that like depending on the resources or the reports, about, let's say, 18% of all energy produced worldwide, at least in 2022, was coming from renewable sources. So you can imagine that when you run a data center, when you operate a transaction online that comes from your website, use the network that consume energy to the power to a data center, there's energy consumption at all levels. It's a proxy for emissions as well, because of our sources of energy are not necessarily renewable, or at least a very small fragment of that is coming from renewable sources. And in terms of like projections of energy consumption, you can imagine, as I said already, with the projection for 2040 of 14% of emissions coming from digital, there's a big upward trend, and the big chunk of it is led by AI, right? You can see the little red, pale red bars starting to add up, towards the right of the graph, but all of that is directly linked to the energy that will take AI, that would require AI to being powered. So basically, like, we are on a trajectory that keep increasing, which we need to acknowledge, and then we have to be responsible and mindful of how we leverage technology, especially new technology such as AI, crypto, blockchain, and so on. The goal is not to point fingers, but more to understand the data, understand the trends, and see how we can adapt our behaviors, right? When we talk about AI or technology overall, like we mentioned the energy consumption, but also to power our, to cool down servers, but also they consume water, right? And for instance, a single conversation with a ChatGPT would consume 500 milliliters of water. So roughly a 20 to 50 question and answer. So again, this is very material. Like, there's places in the world where, like, a hydric stress, or like the lack of resources in terms of water is becoming more and more critical and prevalent. So it's important to realize that when we use internet, like, there's a direct impact, and scarcity of water is going to be more prevalent as we move forward. So again, it's digital is physical, has real impact for real people, right? But if we step back a bit, digital sustainability is not just about resource uses or energy efficiency. It's also about, just to name a few, how we repair our electronic equipment, how we make sure that we have circularity mindset in everything that we build, how we can also consider using open source, how we make our technology more accessible, that will lower the pressure for people to buy new pieces of technology as soon as the newest application or software is not available on your old iPhone or device, right? So it's all of that. And also there's a big thing of it, which is to start, building less and using less and better, right? Because we cannot just sustain this unsustainable growth and consumption when it comes to digital products and equipment. And when I talked about circularity concept, at the moment, there were a recent study published saying that only 5% of mobile devices were recycled in the EU, European Union. So you can imagine that if we keep building more and more, but we are not able to really and properly recycle our devices and the materials in it, we're going to hit a wall at some point, right? We don't have infinite resources. So this is going to be very important to have a more mindful approach to it and be better at both ends, in the building, but also in the recycling. So that's very important. And then perhaps I'm sure some of you are familiar with the rebound effect coming from, or also called the Jevon paradox, but it's a bit of a cautionary tale for AI. And the example is an example of the rebound effect of the global internet mobile network electric consumption. And basically, the rebound effect tells us that sometimes we are focusing, when we're focusing solely on greater efficiency, in the hope that it will lead to an optimization. So the green arrow that goes down, then because it's more accessible, perhaps faster, cheaper, then this optimization is actually counterbalanced by a huge increase in terms of usage, which actually lead to an increase in terms of emissions rather than the decrease. So, for instance, with AI, we all hearing that it's going to be more efficient, consume less energy, and so on and so forth. But like, there's a big risk that we would just make it even more widely usable, accessible, but then it would lead to an actual increase of emissions. So what it means is that we have to be mindful of what we build, why, especially given planetary boundaries, and we cannot just build better, in a term of more efficient, more frugal, we also have to think about building less with a holistic understanding of the impact that it has on the environmental, on the environment and the society. So it's a both and, right? It's efficient, but also building less, like more sufficiency mindset. And it's going to be very important to lower the manufacturing demands and the device proliferation, because it has a huge toll on the environment. Another thing that I'd like you to keep in mind, and I'm sure you've seen this one perhaps on LinkedIn, is the carbon tunnel vision. The climate crisis is very complex, right? And it's one crisis amongst others, and sustainability is much bigger than carbon. And you can see that all industries related to supporting internet and digital, when we talked about extracting, mining, manufacturing, transportation, powering our data centers, and so on and so on, have broad material and direct consequences on the environment. So all of that intertwine into this complex crisis. So that's a bit of the chunk. So it was about, I don't know, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes about bad news, or like setting the tone, the context. But if you, like, from my experience working in design, like if you don't become an expert of the problem, it's going to be hard for you to become an expert of the solutions. So it's important for you to have a real understanding of like the situation and where emissions come from, and what other topics are intertwined that leads us to the situation where emissions are pretty important when it comes to digital, and they're growing. All right. So now we're going to talk about more positive stuff. So we talked about that digital is part of this climate crisis, but also it entails climate opportunities, right? And there's tough challenge ahead, but there's also great opportunity that comes with it to emit less emission and build climate solution and businesses and or climate tech. And one of my background was in UX designer, as Cynthia mentioned, but also as a product manager, right? And when I was as acting product lead in a startup that I worked for in the past few years, I realized that there were plenty of resources for designers and engineers, but less so for product managers. And when I saw this gap in not necessarily knowledge, but in this gap in terms of like having a set of best practices or resources specially catered for product managers, I saw an opportunity to actually help another set of another set of professionals to actually start having tools that were made for them. So basically, I looked at myself in the mirror and I found a very good friend of mine, Antoine Cabot, who works at Salesforce, and the two of us joined our efforts to build the playbook called How to Become a Climate Conscious Product Managers. And in this playbook, we laid out 33 best practices to reduce emissions from your digital product or services, articulated around this five principle. And I'm going to be going through those 5 principles together. So really on solution mindset right now. And then we build a course based on it to go further with Terra that we're going to talk at the very end. So the first principle is to embed climate into your rituals, right? The first thing is to measure, right? There's great tool out there. There's some free, there's some paid. Two that you can maybe have a look at are EcoGrader, CO2gs.gs, that will help you, whether it's to measure your, a page on your website or user flow and a web app. There are tools out there can really help you to measure your emissions, to have a baseline that you can then improve on and kind of understand like things that you can do to actually reduce those emissions. What I would recommend as well is to start to include the climate or CO2 emissions in your KPI or in your product routines, whether it's in your prioritization, your product requirement documents or brief, in your definition of done. There's many ways that you can tweak your process or adapt your process to add this layer to make sure that climate is being part of the discussion as well, and even like included as part as a non-human persona. Sometimes we always talk about including like mastering your target audience to build like very specific and catered experiences, but consider non-human persona as part of this target audience to kind of voice voice the environment, or give an opportunity for this topic to be part of the discussion in terms of the impact that your product can have. When it comes to creating products or new features, there's a bunch of studies out there that reports that most of them fail, right? And we know that everything that we create, there is emissions attached to everything that we create. And if 80% of what we create fail because we haven't done our proper research, or that we didn't validate the need, we didn't validate the solution as part of the creation process or the design process, then what we create is a total waste from an energy standpoint, from a data standpoint, because you probably had like a team of 3-5 people working on this new feature. And so it's basically bad on all fronts. So there's good practices that are just good overall, but they also are good for the environment, right? So again, include the environment as part of your brief, do your research properly, make sure you scan consequences on the environment, the unintended and intended consequences, the impact it has, how you mitigate the negative impact. So all those things. Then consider to trim your scope as well, because if you're going to fail, rather than fail quick on a small increment than on something you worked for a year, right? It's kind of like like good practice overall, right? Like I'm not going to teach you anything, but most of the time, or like a lot of time, we don't follow the best practices. So it's another argument to tell you, do your job the best you can, do your research, trim your scope, launch MVPs, test with small increments, and then build from there, rather than like build a full-fledged solution that no one will use at the end of the day. One thing that I will mention in this chapter is to don't force your user to buy a new phone to use your product. It's super important, and it comes back to accessibility, right? It's kind of the two sides of the same coin with the climate consideration and accessibility, because we know now that all the resources and all the impacts of like mineral extraction, mining, and so on, how damaging it is to the earth, and the total of emission that comes from manufacturing and the overall life cycle from like the physical asset, right? So everything that we can do to reduce the need or the pressure, the demand to build new equipment is critical. So if you make your product more accessible, to support all devices, old computer, old OS, old phones, smartphone, that's great news. It means like people won't have to buy a new phone just to be able to use your app or use your product, which has a huge impact. So really, like if there's one thing, and perhaps I'm going to say that multiple times today, but if there's one thing that you should remember is don't force users to buy new phones just to use your product. Make your product available for like as many people as you can, as many version OS and so on as you can. Another thing, or another trend that is important to understand is that as our internet speed is faster and faster, we build heavier and heavier experiences, right? And basically, like I'm going to make an oversimplification, but digital emissions are a proxy of the weight or the amount of data that is being transferred. So the bigger your experience is, let's say you have a page that is a 50 meg, let's say, that takes 50 megabytes to load, right? That's huge, right? Or so everything that you can do to reduce this page weight from like 50 to 20 to 10 to 2 megabytes, as you can see on the screen, what was the average in 2022, is going to reduce the amount of data transferred, which is going to reduce the emissions at the end of the day. So as a simple proxy, really make sure that we build low light experiences. And so in order to do that, we can already think about building the simplest, most straightforward experience possible, right? Try to not use 3D animations, video, because they're like huge in terms of weight, right? So try to be really mindful about how you use those, because they're very heavy and they incur a lot of emissions. And when you have to use them, such as images, try to compress them, make them lighter, make them adaptable to the context of their use, whether it's on a smartphone or on a computer. Make sure to use less and do better and make them smaller, compress them as much as possible. As well, kill things that are not used or not useful. There's a lot of data lingering around. There's a lot of features or content that we published, that we released at some point, that are just not being used at all. So they bring no value for users, no value for the business, and actually they cost the business because they have to be stored somewhere, and that takes, that costs money to store, with your cloud provider, perhaps. And also it's going to incur make your code more complex, because then you're going to ask your developers to maintain some features or section that are not used. So it's just going to be costs are going to add up, right? So kill things when you think that are not used or useful. And there's easy way with the with the dashboards and analytics to kind of spot those. And keep in mind the 3 U rules for useful, usable, and used. And that applies to product, features, video, components, scripts, like really go, try to think about all those stuff, because like if they're not useful, not usable, and not used, probably means that they don't have a room, they shouldn't be there in the first place. The 3rd chapter is to become carbon aware. So one of the first thing that you can do is to choose a sustainable hosting provider. There's more and more options for you nowadays. Oops, sorry. And that's something that not for everyone, but for a lot of cases could be actually potentially cheaper, but also will consider that as an option. And also educate your user about their impact, because it's important. Sometimes we offer, like, let's say like you have an app with an e-commerce app with the options for the delivery, like perhaps try to lean users to choose the greenest, or the greenest mode of transport of delivery. Like if one is makes that your package will be delivered by bikes or by EV, let's say, rather than by a big truck powered by fossil fuel or by gas, maybe like you can also have the chance to educate your user to make them choose the greenest option versus the most polluting options. So there's also a role that we have to play in terms of like how we present information in our design and in our content, in our copy, to really educate our users and make the green choice by default, but also tell them why and how, and make them feel good about them choosing the green option by default, or the most renewable option by default. There's also a rationale around using the cheapest energy source possible. Like you can, we talked about choosing, sustainable hosting provider powered by renewable energy, for instance, but there's also time of the day where there's less stress on the electrical network, which means that maybe if let's say you want to train your AI models, perhaps do it at night rather than in the day, because it's probably you're gonna put less stress on the network. But also it means like if you put in less stress, there's it's less likely that your electric provider will have to use a backup, a coal plant to actually provide this surplus or this excess need of electricity. So those are things that you can also do, and it may sound complicated, but there's actually API that can help you to really monitor like when the internet is cheap, when the electricity is cheapest, but also when it emits the least amount of emissions. So there's those considerations that you can also incorporate. And finally, use your influence. We all have a network, and I'm not just talking about our family. I'm talking about existing colleagues, past colleagues, or people with our network on LinkedIn. Just look at, on LinkedIn, perhaps on my network tab, like look how many people are there, like all those person you can influence, right? So talk about this topic, share your commitment, share your questions, share your, articles that you find that really can bring value and can help people realize the impact that they have from their products. And in the context of a business, try to find allies within your company or your organization. Try to set up a climate working group, and beyond your company, as as in your value chain, whether it's downstream or upstream, try to also leverage your influence to make climate part of the discussion as well with your providers. When you do an RFPs, when you're contracting with a provider, make sure that they also are following the best practices. Or you can ask them like what's their climate strategy, what's their sustainable strategy, right? Do they have a roadmap? Do they have commitments? So that's important. And internally, if you have the budget, even if you don't have a budget, invite people to come do a 30-minute talk, 1-hour talk, or organize training, because we are at a stage where the awareness on the topic about emissions coming from digital is fairly low. It's gaining momentum, but it's not there yet. So the more we can talk about it internally, externally in our network, I'm going to spare you the Christmas dinner. Probably you're not going to want to do that on that day, but try to really make this topic more widely known, and that's going to start creating a momentum that would drive action, climate action further. So this is really important that we leverage this influence, right? And if you do part of what I just mentioned, or even all of what I've mentioned, like there's not only a good case to make your digital products and services not only more sustainable, but also good for your business, good for your users, and good for your career, right? Because when I talk about making a more lightweight experience, it's probably going to be faster, and that's going to increase the satisfaction of your users, right? That makes sense. But also it's going to rank better in terms of SEO, because it's going to load faster, and like search engine will appreciate that you offer a good experience, so they will rank you higher. And perhaps if you delete a bunch of data, a bunch of unused features and so on, it's going to be cheaper to run and develop, because people, your developers and engineers won't be lost in a super complex, code base, or less so. And also, as we discussed, it's going to be costing more from your cloud build expenditure, right? So this is great on the other hand. And if your engineers also understand better the code base, it's probably going to be more resilient and secure, because there's going to be less liabilities, right? It's not if they're lost in their own code, it's likely that there's going to be the security concerns, let's say. So that's on the product level, right? And on the business level, we see everyone is scared. I mean, the more the climate crisis is part of our life, the more people care, and people have jobs and people buy. So whether it's your customers or your employees, if you care about this topic and if you make commitment, you're likely to win more customers and retain existing ones. You're likely to attract and retain top talents within your company. You're also likely to build new features that will really be specific to the environment, that will enhance your experience or the experience of your users and increase their satisfaction. And you're going to differentiate yourself from competition. I mean, I see a bunch of products right now that are being like a MailChimp, but a green version, that is environmental friendly. And there's a lot of like competition building. So if you're not taking care of this problem or this opportunity, then others will take the lead on this, and most likely you're going to suffer from it. So from a business standpoint, it's super important to start taking action on this topic. So all of that to say is that usually we see climate change or environmental focus or sustainability as a kind of a Debbie Downer. It's like, oh, we have to do it because if not, it's going to be a problem. But actually, and we oppose them, and we oppose it from business, right? It's like either we do it for the environment, or we do it because it makes business sense. But I hope by this slide and by everything that I talked about, you can see that it's actually reinforcing each other, and it's not just something else to do, an extra effort, something that will cost us more, something that would derail our roadmap, right? You actually support it and increase the likelihood of success, and while making our product more accessible, faster and better, and that would convert better as well if you have an e-commerce, for instance, or transactional experience. So I hope that you can see that it can really benefit everyone. And it's just another set of best practices that you already know for like 90% of them, that just have another co-benefits that you didn't know about, that will just reinforce the desire or like the intention to actually make it happen, be part of your process. You know, like when talk about MVPs, as we said, research, making your experience fast, lightweight, and so on, straight to offer a straight path to user value, to deliver value. You know, that is good principle. It has nothing to do with climate, but it has a really strong climate and sustainable argument. And I think that's why it's super important to understand the impact and measure it and see overall how this perform. So I'm going to stop around there. Just so you know, so what I presented was the content of like a very high level version of the 60 pages playbook that we released on the topic. But we built a course with Terra called Digital Product Decarbonization that goes further into it with case studies. We go in detail. We have a workshop. We have assignments, or interactive sessions. So if you're interested to learn more about the topic, you can check this out. And our next cohort starts in 2-3 weeks. The September 4th is the last date of enrollment. And yeah, that'd be fun. That'll be our third cohort so far. It's been great. So hopefully that will continue to be the case. And on that note, what I wish is for everyone and all of us to seize the opportunity that we have, you know, in front of us. Try to do our best work and have an impact for now and for future generation. So that be it for the content today. Thank you for your attention. And Cynthia, I'd be happy to take any questions. I'm going to have a sip of water in the meantime.
No worries. We have a few. So let me start with the first one. I'm looking for good examples of LCA for SaaS companies, example Salesforce. Any suggestions would be very helpful. I suspect they mean good sort of like, you know, lower impact, so to speak, companies.
Would you mind repeating the question? Sorry.
Yeah. I'm looking for good examples of LCA for SaaS companies, example Salesforce. Any suggestions would be helpful. And Ritu, if you want to clarify at all, please feel free to mute yourself.
Yeah. So LCA for lifecycle analysis. For SaaS, I mean, like, if we're talking about like carbon accounting firm overall, there's a bunch of them, like easy to find out there. When it comes to digital LCA specifically, there's a fewer amount of players in the market. Mostly they're based in Europe, because that's where this topic of the digital sustainability is the most advanced. So if that's the question, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's a bunch of a solution like Verdict, Fruger, who I collaborate with, and a bunch of them that I can send perhaps in the chat or after the session. But there's a few options out there. There's an EcoGrader as well, who has a free option, but paying one. So it's growing, but right now carbon accounting firm overall are doing this, or like ESG firm, but without necessarily the tools or the digital understanding. So that's why now there's this new niche that is really specific on doing IT carbon assessment, you know, measurement. And there's those services are interesting because in the free tools that you can see out there, most of the time they only measure one page at a time, you know, and it has to be a public page, right? So that everyone can access without an account. And those professional tools that I mentioned, they can really scan a whole service, a whole company, like even a functional unit of features. So that's why it's very important to have those solutions available, because we need to establish baseline to be able to have an effective plan to reduce emissions, and knowing where they come from and what we can do, what are the recommendations that applies, and the one that will be less efficient. So I think it's a great question. I hope more and more people would start investing in those solutions, because that's going to be critical if we want to have a fast and efficient and effective response, basically, to lower emissions.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, on to Trixie. What examples have you seen in the industry of effectively monetizing reductions in device replacement revenue models?
I don't have an example on top of my head. I could research for it, but I know that there is one player adjacent kind of a response, but there is the Fair Fund in Europe that really promotes circularity, and where like the phone is built in a way that you can, like, I'm just going to throw a number, but like out of the 50 pieces of your phone, or like 20 or whatever, you can really replace any of them as well, because right now the issue is that once my phone is, my screen is broken or the battery is like off, I have to buy the whole entire new thing, right? Which doesn't make sense. So there's more and more players that try to just help you to replace the small component or the little specific part that is maybe outdated or just not performant anymore. So those would be things I would really look for. Now, in terms of like incentives and business models, I would not be able to answer properly that question. I probably could do more research and come back to you if you write to me on LinkedIn or on the Slack on Terra. But yeah, there's even in France and perhaps in Europe, like some notations, some ratings on how much products that you buy are circularity friendly, like to what extent you can easily replace components of them. So I think those regulations are really important for the consumer to make better decisions, and for brands also to have pressure to do a better job. So those are interesting, and I keep receiving like spamish, text message or email being like, hey, do you want to buy a new phone? And you can commit to 2 years plan. And I'm like, no, I don't want to buy a new phone. Like, leave me alone. Like, I know what it takes to build them. So I'm going to be fine. I'm going to try to keep the lifespan of my phone, to last as much as possible. And when I'm going to have to change it, I'm probably going to do it on my own. So like, that's the issue with the existing business models. They really try to refurbish, like to sell you a new device every year, every 2 years, which is very problematic. Hence also the concept of perceived obsolescence and material obsolescence that we really need to get under control, because at the moment it's really not viable and sustainable as a society. Perhaps it's a good business model, but as a society, it's really damaging. So long answer. Hope that kind of gives you pointers that are hopefully helpful.
Great. Are there any measures, policies in the works on the server/hosting level to optimize, example, websites at scale by pushing compression, converting images to new formats, etc.?
The regulation that I'm aware of are not as specific when it comes to compressions, or like, because those are very specific techniques, but the regulation that we see right now, the CSRD, that force companies to disclose their emissions, and Scope 3 is part of those emissions, and a lot of digital emissions are, getting into the Scope 3. So definitely those type of regulations, whether it's in Europe or in North America, they're definitely they would play a big role. And most specifically, there's a regulation called the RIN law in France, who force middle size and large size company to disclose their IT emissions. So emissions related to their digital product and services, including their IT fleet. So those are very specific piece of regulations that are very important. And I wish to see them going to North America, because we need to have a better, like, there's two ways you can see about the systemic change to happen. Like, either you hope that there's 1% of top players to kind of do a great job and inspire others, right? But it takes a lot of time, and it's only affecting a small amount of companies or leaders, let's say, that will actually take action, or you raise the floor for everyone by implementing regulations that would force every company to be better and do a better job. So I think regulations are critical if we want to have an efficient and efficient response basically to the climate crisis. So I wish to see more and more regulations coming our way to force company to, one, disclose and then propose a clear plan for reduction with short-term targets. We're not talking about 2060 or 2040 or 50. We're talking about, okay, what about next year? We drive our roadmaps like weekly, monthly, quarterly. Why would we make plans in 2050 when it comes to climate? It doesn't make sense, right? It's kind of like pushing the issue for the next person who will take the role, or the next person in charge. So we really need to have short-term targets as well. So that'd be my answer.
Great. Now this is someone asked a question that I think you'd be well positioned to answer. In a world where AI continues to establish itself as an everyday use, would you use the same approaches? I think it's measurable, but I'm curious on your thoughts of how to make it more sustainable.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We're like, anyway, I don't know
You can drop the news. It's fine.
We're actually working on an AI sustainable course, or how to leverage AI sustainably at the moment. That on top of the digital product decarbonization course that we are currently running. But basically, it's twofold. It's like, do we really need AI? Because sometimes right now, like it's almost like an old trend. Like everyone puts AI everywhere, and like there's an AI overload because we just see AI everywhere. And I'm just tired to see. I just recently, and this is not this to Google, like just one example, but yesterday I looked at their newsletter and I saw AI like on every single sentence, or like three quarter of the content was about AI, and I was like, I don't care. Like what's in it for me, like tell me about what's it's like when you love with technology, when you're in love with what you do, you forget about the actual value necessarily that you bring to people. So anyway, small tangent, but basically, like, is AI really useful? Like, do we need to use it? Does it bring the value, the benefits for our users? And if the answer is no, or like it's not necessarily a drastic improvement, you can use other technology that are an alternative that are perhaps more relevant or catered to actually what you're trying to do. Could be a simple algorithm. It could be simple, like a mathematical formula. It could be a spreadsheet. Like, I mean, name it. Like, there's a lot of solution out there. So is AI useful or the right solution? Perhaps not. And if so, what are the alternatives? And then if AI is the only way that you want to solve this complex problem, then how you size, you choose the right model, you perform the right task, you choose the right sizing, and so on and so on. How you leverage, pre-trained open source models, so that you don't have to reinvent from scratch, reinvent the wheel from scratch, and so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of good practices here that can help us, but I think it has to start with, again, we talked about efficiency and sufficiency earlier, and you cannot just rely on efficiency, right? Or you also have to ask yourself, what is the actual needs? Is AI the right solution? Because sometimes, or like most of the time, we follow the hype. It's like, oh, AI, let me put it everywhere. It's like, this is kind of like a kid discovering chocolate cake for the first time, right? He's going to stuff his face with chocolate because there's sugar, it's delicious, but we need an adult in the room being like, okay, let's face it. Let's see how you feel. Let's see how your energy level will go. Like, let's see your health indicators, and maybe let's not eat chocolate cake every single meal, and maybe like let's keep it for the weekend and when it's actually maybe your birthday or a celebration. But so I think that's the stage with AI that I feel we are in, where we just put it everywhere without even the notion of the impact, and we need to be a bit more mindful and thoughtful about when and how we choose it. And when we have to choose it, then do it in a sustainable way. There's a bunch of best practices that applies to what I just said earlier, but there are also others that are a bit more specific to AI that we will also cover during in this course that would be released most likely in fall this year. So yeah,
Great.
again, I'm not saying AI is bad. I'm just saying like let's also see the big picture and try to be mindful about how we use it.
That maybe segues nicely into this question, which is what training can you recommend for users? Like, how do you use technology more sustainably?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of training out there. Like obviously there's our course, the digital product decarbonization that we mentioned. I can go back to the previous slide if I'm still sharing my screen. So there's mine, obviously. But there's a bunch of them out there as well. There's the Green Software Foundation. There's I think I could send you a bunch of links. By no means I kind of I want to only talk about mine, but there's super smart people everywhere interested in the topic, super capable to deliver like great trainings, whether it's a B2B or B2C. So depending on your need, depending on your role, your expertise, exactly what you're looking for, I would be able to recommend the best course for you. But yeah, it's super important to get trained, and it's not that complicated when you understand the big concepts and the best practices and how to measure emission and where you have the biggest impact. We at a stage where one, we need to understand the problem, two, we need to understand the right solution, and then we have to implement those actions, start taking part of climate action.
And just to clarify, she meant from like the end user side, so not anyone designing the product, but people using the product.
Oh, how you educate? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I kind of answered the wrong question.
All good.
How you educate your users? I think it's so here it's a tricky one because you don't want to judge user, and 95% of the responsibility in terms of like reducing emission comes from you, right? It's your product, it's your experience, it's your business. You are responsible for that. But then when you want to educate your user, train them, or like help them to understand their emissions, then it's a very thin line to offer them options, as well as having a copy that is non-judgmental. No one wants to be on the wrong side of the argument. They don't want to be blamed. So you have to offer option, but tell them like the actual impact of the choice that they would make, and try to explain like how good would be, or what would be the benefits of choosing the green options. And the green option has to be by default, right? But there's way where you just explain the facts, and others where you kind of like try to influence them as well. But you really need to work hand in hand with the marketing team or the copywriting team, because that can be super tricky, and you will probably fail at some points, or like maybe lean towards one side of the other, and you have to learn from that as well. And you can also test that in the first place before even it's released to a large chunk of your users. You can do progressive rollout if you're not sure about how people will respond to it. So yeah, this is there's no one answer, but there's ways to do it, and it's important to make it part of the discussion, because it has to be people. Some people, like, not everyone wants information about it, but it's important that it becomes a topic that is discussed and that is not emotionally loaded, that helps people to make the right decisions or justify your own decision as well as a business.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one or two more. So currently regulations to disclose emissions are only European Union, nothing in North America or elsewhere. Can you confirm that companies operating in EU must also comply with this regulation?
So there's the CSRD in North America, but it's not specific to the to regulating IT emission or disclosing IT emission, even though it's part of the scope 3. But what I was referring to earlier in Europe with and in France with the green law, it's a good regulation to in the sense that it forces company to disclose specifically their IT emissions. So I don't know if so those companies would have to comply with it. Now, like when it comes to every law, there is like a progressive rollout. So, there's a more nuance here. But there's a bunch of regulations that are being more and more sophisticated. And I think it was a month ago, there were even a new regulation in EU who is regulating AI as well, AI uses. So I think those are inspiring examples. And if you recall, perhaps like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we had the GDPR who came from Europe, and suddenly all companies had to comply with it in North America as well. And that derailed like roadmap for like 3-6 months, depending on the business. And so we need to, if we want to be smart, we can anticipate that those changes will come, because we can see that it's not sustainable, right? The way we consume digital is not sustainable. And the climate crisis is just going to be more and more prevalent in our society. So we can anticipate those changes and start to take action now to make sure that when those regulation changes, there's maybe a delta that we need still to be a chunk of work that we need to be done. But overall, you'll be already anticipating, and rather than facing the wall, at the very last second. So hoping I answer your question, but there's also a nice work done by the W3C Sustainable Committee that I'm part of, that has listed all the regulation related to all the regulation that could apply to digital. So I could perhaps follow up with you, Marie-Josée, and send you those information.
Okay, and very last question. Today, is there any worldwide accepted standard which rates the digital product decarbonization?
Depends what we mean by standards, like a label. I mean, there is the W3C sustainable digital standards, or like that propose a huge set of best practices that you can implement. So W3C is really like the best source that I would recommend, and I could share like a few links after the call to make sure that you can have a look at it.
Great. Thank you so much, François.
My pleasure.
And thanks everyone for joining. We hope to see you in the course to find more tricks, or I guess they're not tricks, they're actually practices to design digital products. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.